Today I'm here to talk to you about Haiku. So those of you who are expecting a talk on Japanese poetry, I apologize, that's not what this is. So the Haiku I am talking about today is the open source operating system. Haiku is an open source operating system that is not based on Linux, and it's also not based on FreeBSD or any sort of Unix. And unlike FreeBSD or Unix, Haiku is a operating system that focuses very much on the desktop. So that means that when you boot up your computer, instead of seeing a terminal console, you see something more like this. So Haiku is designed with the kernel and the user interface together, and you won't see Haiku running on a server anytime soon. Haiku also tries to be sort of a simple but powerful kind of operating system. That means that the Haiku philosophy is that by default, the user interface should have sane defaults. Things should be good and easy to use in the beginning, but it shouldn't hinder a power user who wants to get things done. And probably Haiku's most prominent and obvious feature is that it is inspired by and backwards compatible with the V operating system. And I'm going to guess that most of you don't know what the V operating system is either, so it is time for a quick history lesson. So way back in 1990, two guys, Jean-Louis Gasset and Steve Sakuman, left Apple to start a company called B. B went into the computer hardware business, and they started off with a computer called the B box, which you can see here. It was pretty cool. It had some nice lights that showed you your CPU activity on the side, and it ran multiple low-cost processors. And so eventually they went looking, and they wanted to find an operating system that they could run on this machine. Since it used multiple processors, they were trying to find a real-time OS. And when nothing really seemed to fit, they decided to make their own. So that's where BOS came in. BOS was pretty forward-thinking for its time. It had some cool features like a really nice object-oriented API. It had a database-like file system, and it also had low latency for audio and video. And probably one of the things that set it apart the most was its extensive use of multiple threads, which was not something that common back in the mid-90s. It allowed it to really remain responsive even under heavy load with multiple videos playing and programs running. As you can see, in this old demo that I found. The original B-Box that actually shipped to developers actually contained two PowerPC processors, and that was something that was pretty rare back then because multiple processors was really something only reserved for servers at the time. But eventually B decided that they wanted to get out of the hardware business and focus exclusively on selling BOS. That unfortunately didn't go so well. They had a really hard time getting BOS on computers and shipping to people, in part due to a little bullying from Microsoft back in the day. But it was a good OS, and they had some fans. At one point, Apple decided that they might want to use it as the basis for Mac OS X. But as you probably are aware, they decided to go with Next instead, Steve Jobs' company. And so after this deal sort of fell through, B decided that they were going to work on these things called Internet Appliance Devices. They were sort of like these, they did the software for these sort of Internet-connected terminals and things like that. And they even made the original iPad software. But these devices never really caught on, and unfortunately in early 2001 or so, B went out of business and was sold to Palm. And BOS still had a lot of fans at that time, and so in August of 2001, a bunch of BOS fans got together and decided that they were going to implement the entire project, entirety of BOS as an open source project and call it OpenBOS. Fast forward more than 11 years, and we have Haiku. Somewhere along the lines, they decided to change the name, and they changed the name to Haiku based off the Haiku error messages that you could find in the BOS browser net positive. So for example, this is something you might see if you got a 404 in this old browser. And so they thought that would be a fun name and yeah. And so since Haiku is basically an open source implementation of BOS, as you would expect, it has a lot of the same features. So, namely, it has the same sort of kernel design for a more faster, like multi-threaded design, sort of built alongside the user interface to really try and push to make sure that the user interface is responsive. It has the same database-like file system that BOS used. So that means not only do you have files and folders, you can also put attributes on your files and search your hard drive. And I'll show you a little bit of that in the demos later. It had the same philosophy as BOS had, the idea that the user interface should be sort of cohesive and unified. And it also has the exact same object-oriented API that BOS did. They took the headers and they reverse engineered, and they are completely backwards compatible with BOS. So that means you can run, if you find an old program that used to run on BOS, it runs on Haiku. You find old source code that used to compile on BOS, it'll compile and run on Haiku. And so you might be thinking, what have they added since 11 years ago? So some of the things they've done, obviously newer hardware support. They've added things like USB and Wi-Fi, so that's a little bit more usable nowadays. They have a more modern web browser, one that's based off of WebKit, an HTML5 browser. Still needs a little work, but it's certainly better than net positive was. It has internationalization support and a UI layout editor, so that applications can resize when you have those pesky, really long German words. And it also has GCC4 support. Yay. The last version of BOS ran GCC 2.95, and so if Haiku wants to be backwards compatible, so do they. But they managed to make a sort of compatibility hybrid system where they compile the operating system with both GCC 2.95 and GCC4, and the operating system decides which libraries to load when you start a program, so you can have old programs and new programs right next to each other. So Haiku is currently working towards an release 1 release. It's currently at an R1 Alpha 4, and their goal for a final release of Haiku is to be fully backwards compatible with BOS R5, and they've done that for a number of years now, but they've just been working towards getting it more stable and adding a few more features. For example, package management is one of the big things they want to get in before they actually release. And they just, as of yesterday, 2 developers are now going to be working for a month on contracts to add package management, get that a little more towards completion. And with that, I'd like to show you a demo. All right, let's see. So, let's see if this pulls up on the right screen. Okay, good. And one thing you might notice pretty quickly is that the OS boots fairly quickly, especially considering that this is actually on a VM and not on real hardware. So we're already at the desktop, and we can already interact. So first things you'll notice is it looks kind of like the desktop. You have icons here. There's folders you can navigate. This thing up here is called the desk bar. It's sort of like the start menu and taskbar that you'd see on Windows. So if we go in here, you can see that we have applications like you'd sort of expect. And I'll show off one of the features I mentioned earlier. There is how Haiku and BOS had a database-like file system. So that means that there's this little fun find window here, and you can do a search through the entire file system, but you can search by more than just file name and things like that. So there's the whole thing, files are indexed by attributes. So I can go in here and say there's a whole thing in Haiku called a person file. So in the person file, the file itself is completely blank. All of the data in a person file is just extra attributes that they've tacked on on this database file system. So you can search by that. You can search by attribute, and you can look through and say search by nickname. You could say nickname contains, for example, Al. And you go through and you search through computer and you find these people. How about our good friend Alan Turing here?
Oh yeah.
And such. Another thing you can do, so these searches aren't just sort of static. These can be sort of a live search. So if you search for, I don't know, something like hello, you find all these hello example source files. But I could also open up a text program here called, let's see, what's that one? I could save this file as hello, and it pops up immediately in the search window, right there. So these things can be actually pretty useful for things like, one thing I've used them for is if I have a whole bunch of music files on my system, I can just put in a query that says show me all of my music, and I just have a big list of all the MP3s or whatever files on my computer, and I can sort through them that way. Another feature that Haiku has that BOS didn't have is you might have noticed that sort of one of the trademark kind of iconic things about BOS and Haiku is they have these little yellow tabs for their windows. In BOS, in Haiku, you could always move them around like this. It was kind of fun. But what Haiku takes it a little bit further, and you can actually combine these and tab any application together that you want. So I could, so for example, I could pull open this media player. I don't know why you'd want to do this one, but you could tab them together. Yay. Which can be pretty fun. So one thing I use this for is doing making an impromptu sort of media player. I can take this media player. You can also sort of tab things together on the side as well. So not only can you do like sort of a tab thing, I can take this media player, drag it over, and attach it to this playlist window here, and then I could take both of those and I could attach it to sort of a window here, and I have sort of an impromptu sort of like media player. I can pull up my music files here. I could just drag something into the playlist, and they start playing. I probably didn't set up the audio on here, but it does work. So yeah, Haiku also, yeah, as you can see, has a media player and things like that. BOS, as you saw with the low latency audio and video stuff, sort of got a nickname of being the media OS. So Haiku also has sort of the same underlyings. There's a pretty cool media kit that runs inside of Haiku. You can actually, don't know if I have the program installed here. Let me see. Maybe not. But underneath Haiku is a whole node-based system of audio and video, and you can sort of link various audio mixers and things together, sort of in the base operating system. Some of you who've worked with audio applications might have seen something like that, on a per application basis, but it's something that's sort of baked into the OS itself. Let's see what else. You can also, so as I said, you can run BOS applications, but one thing that's nice is recently both OpenJDK was ported as well as the Qt libraries. So earlier when I said it's not Linux, it's not Unix, it does, however, have some POSIX compliance, which means you can port Linux programs, and some of them will just compile, and you can pull up a shell and you can't do all your fun Linuxy things. And if, for example, a lot of people complain that there's not a whole lot of file editing or text editing software, but so now that Qt's ported, you can have sort of some real applications in Haiku. Another thing, Haiku uses has Workspaces by default. If I open this Workspaces thing, you can see I've got 4 workspaces set up. You can switch them around, and each workspace can have a different wallpaper if you wanted to, and also a different screen resolution, which might be going on here. And in some of the things, you might see these little icons every so often. So BOS and Haiku have sort of like a widgety kind of thing to them. So I can drag this to the desktop, and now I have a little Workspaces thing on the desktop. We can switch to them like this. And you can see those on programs like, for example, another one that's fun is they have activity monitor. You can see your CPU status. So say if I want to have sort of nice little CPU graph on my machine, I can just pop that down, have that on my desktop, which is kind of fun. And we have like I said, there's a WebKit-based browser. Seems the and so yeah, so if by default launches the Haiku user guide, and there's some fun things in there. But it does work somewhat. Some sites work better than others right now, but it is sort of an active development. I think it'll be really cool once. Right now there's tabs in the browser, but eventually tabs could be moved to just be sort of part of the operating system with the sort of tabs anywhere that I showed you earlier. But for now, they have their own separate tabs. So the last thing I'll show you is it also shuts down unbelievably quickly. And it really does shut down about this fast on hardware as well, which is really nice. It's a very pretty lightweight system. So with that, if you want to try out Haiku yourself, you can download the current alpha at haiku-os.org. There's also nightly builds available at haiku-files.org. And I also have a CD around here if you want to just try it out. You can get CD images as well as VM images and USB drive images there. And if you want to try out some of the old Haiku or BOS software, you can go to haikuware.com. There's a whole bunch of programs you can try out. And if you're so inclined, if you try it out and you sort of like it, I'd encourage you to try and join the project as well. I've found as a software engineer that the code is very, very, very well written. If you're into systems and OS sort of work, you should really take a look at it. It's a really nice designed OS. I know that I've looked at Linux code before, and it's daunting to even start to imagine coding in. But the Haiku source code is pretty nice. You can go to haiku-os.org/community to see the mailing lists and forums and whatnot. Also, they are probably going to be part of the 2013 Google Summer of Code. They have been in Summer of Code for a number of years now, and in a few weeks the project will be announced, so if you want to earn some money, maybe consider Haiku as a project. With that, I will take questions, and I see Nick has a question here.
What sort of command line shells are supported?
Right now, it's just sort of bash is built in, but over the last couple of weeks, the terminal has gone over a big overhaul. It's actually a lot more standards compliant now, so I wouldn't be surprised if nicer shells like CSH.
The emulator, you mean?
What was that?
You mean like the
Yeah, the terminal emulator that's in Haiku has gone over. It's gotten an overhaul recently, so it supports a lot more things now. So I wouldn't be surprised if ZSH or other shells would work just fine. Yes.
You said they were working on a package manager. So
Yes.
that means a GUI-based package manager.
Maybe. So the way Haiku is going to do packages is actually kind of neat. They're going to do sort of a, they want the sort of ability to get your packages from anywhere. They don't want sort of this, you have to download it from our repository kind of feel. So they're going to do something similar to like Mac OS X applications where you have an application zip, you can drop it into a folder, and what they're going to do, so in Mac OS X, what they do is it's actually just a folder and all your files are hidden. And it looks like an application, but it's actually a folder structure. In Haiku, what they're going to do is do a sort of file system trickery where if you drop a zip in a folder, it will, behind the scenes, they'll do a thing called Union FS, and they'll take all of the stuff in that folder and create a file system as if those were all extracted in your system. So that means you can make more than just applications. You could do things like drivers and things. Drop them in the folder. As far as the OS is concerned, they're installed places. But for you, they're just in a folder, and you can remove them, add them. And of course, they'll do that with probably a package manager to help with downloads and dependencies and things like that. Anyone else?
Can it run Rails?
I have not tried. That's a good question. I think there is a Ruby package for it right now. If you start up Haiku right now, there's sort of a halfway package manager. You can go into the terminal and type in install optional package. If you pass it the -L command, it'll tell you all the packages that are available. I think Ruby is one of them, so that might be a fun experiment for someone. Yes.
Do you use it regularly?
I don't use it as like my main desktop, but I do start it up every so often. It's not to the point where you'd want to use it as your main desktop yet, but it is getting there.
You said it had a good solid API, but API without documentation is.
Oh yeah, true. So, so it's mostly the B API. So if you look in, you can find the old what was it called? The B book has all the documentation of the API, and there's also the Haiku book, which has all the things that are different from the B book, and it's not too big. And all those you can find on the Haiku website. They've all been released to the public, so you can look through that. There's also, on the Haiku website, there's a programming in Haiku tutorial. It kind of starts from the basics of like, hey, here's how you work in C++, but eventually they get into how you code a GUI application. Anyone else?
So the desktop is its own thing, so like no X applications from Linux will ever work in it by default.
No, you'd have to port the X server. I think someone did port the X server, but it's like, yeah, it'd be like running in an application with your X server. Yeah. In the same way that, you can't run X on Windows, it's been done. It's not native, but you could do it. Yes?
Is this designed to be modular like Linux is? Like say I want a different networking system, or I want a different file manager, or mainly like desktop environment or window manager?
Yes.
Are there different options?
So, no, not really. That's sort of what Haiku is trying to be, is not that. They want to be something that you install that is one cohesive package that can manage and actually make a good experience. Yeah, and presumably someone could actually make a different desk bar on a different system or whatnot and plop them in, because the code itself is very modular. So you could, if you wanted to, write something else, but they're really trying to be the project that does not have the 1,000 configurations problem. Yes.
How easy is it to like theme the desktop?
Not very. There's so sort of the title bar things are, and the sort of the UI look is extracted out in the code base. So you could write your own look and feel classes, and but as far as I mean, you can change some colors of some of the things, but as far as like completely overhauling the look and feel, you'll be doing a bit of coding. But
So there's no like GUI.
right.
So it seems kind of like a hobbyist thing right now, but do you think it will get like a mainstream following in the future?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think the project has some promise. I don't know. They're really going to have to figure out their how to get more applications on there. So like some of the original thought was, maybe you're re-implementing BOS, so you have all these applications, and that solves your application problem. But it's been 11 plus years, and those applications are very old. Not many people want to run them anymore. But yeah, so Haiku R1 is going to be pretty much what you see here. Haiku R2 is when they're going to scrap the API that they have currently. Who knows what R2 will be. That's when they let their imaginations go wild and they change Haiku to be what they want it to be. So we'll see. Yeah, I don't know if Haiku R1 will be anything special, but I have a feeling in the future, once they're past that stage, you see some cool stuff. Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but what's its native language? Like, what is it written in? Is it
Yeah.
API?
It's mostly written in C++, and some of the lower level stuff is C. All of the API stuff is C++.
Are there any like bindings?
I think someone a couple of years ago for a Google Summer Code did bindings to Python. And there may be another language, I don't remember, but yeah, there's at least a couple languages. Anyone else? All right, well, thanks for coming.